we've been so lucky with imports in oil. I think in about 2014-15, oil prices came down by half.
Yeah.
You'd think India was just an oil importer, I mean, largely. Yeah. When oil prices come from $110 per barrel to 60 or 65, you think we'd boom.
See, but it's a good point, Prannoy, but what we say in the paper is that, these structural factors, when exports and investment kind of collapsed quite a bit, then why didn't the economy sink even further? And the answer is that oil prices actually gave us a boost. It gave a boost to revenues, gave a boost to consumption. So it propped up, shored it up, and prevented it from becoming much worse than it otherwise would have been.
That's very kind. It's like when you go to a doctor and he gives you an aspirin and you say, head is better, but it's not there. He said, it would have been so much worse if you hadn't had the medicine.
No, but that is true. The oil price gave us a bit of a cushion for
if you drop from 110 to 60 or 65, that's wonderful for a country like this.
The other thing is that, other thing to mention is that in terms of the short-term factors, several people have said, weak agricultural performance, which may be true as well, demonetization and GST.
But sorry, weak agricultural means it's not been a terrible monsoon every year. We're pretty lucky on that.
But prices, agricultural prices were down. So in agricultural incomes were down. So that's a short-term factor.
Agricultural incomes were down, yes.
Short-term factor.
Output not down, incomes down.
Exactly.
Which matters to the average farmer.
Exactly. And then, of course, everyone has spoken about the demonetization GST. That has also probably had a short-term impact as well.
Right.
But what we argue in the paper is that these may be important, but the key short-term factor is a second wave of the twin balance sheet challenge.
So it's now 4 balance sheet problem.
We're going to come to that, hopefully. But essentially, to summarize, the first balance sheet was when the public sector banks led to the infrastructure companies, and there was over-exuberant lending. There was also some cronyism. A lot of bad lending went on, and that created the first wave, where then. And the way to understand the twin balance sheet crisis is that, the infrastructure sector had too much debt, right? And this was actually first pointed out by Ashish Gupta of Credit Suisse. He did that famous House of Debt.
Where he showed the...
the first, in fact, the regulators and the government were all behind. So
they were just hiding the non-performing assets, and he said it's way higher.
The debt was way high for the corporates.
Let's have a look at your what your paper says about the double twin balance sheet, or twin, or 4 balance sheet problem. It's linked to the breakdown in the financial system. Now, earlier, the twin balance sheet problem or the crisis was banks and infrastructure companies, corporates of the infrastructure area, right? Mainly. Everybody was affected, but banks were giving it to infrastructure and they were not being able to pay it back.
Because remember, growth slowed down considerably. These loans were made in the boom period, and then when the growth slowed down, so many of these investments went sour. So bank loans to infrastructure, corporates and others that could not be repaid. They could not repay them. So they both had, the infrastructure company balance sheet affected the bank's balance sheet. Because they couldn't repay the banks.
They couldn't repay the banks. Now, what's happening now is the 4 balance sheet crisis. The first twins and another twin. This is NBFCs. Now, for those who are not quite familiar with these...
can I just explain NBFCs?
Yes, please.
So NBFCs are essentially called non-bank financial companies. They do, on the lending side, they do lending like the banks, but they don't take money from depositors. So that's why, so in a sense, they are less sacred in some ways, because with the banks, depositor money is involved. You want to be ultra sure that everything is safe. NBFCs take a bit more risk because they don't borrow from depositors, but they do the same lending that banks do. So in this second wave,
So they NBFCs gave a lot of money to real estate companies, and real estate has had a real hit. So they've not been able to pay back. NBCs, we've seen a major NBC. ILFS.
No, ILFS is not ILFS is an NBFC, but ILFS is. Let's just come to ILFS.
So just generally NBFCs, they are all in the doldrums right now, and ILFS is a special problem. But they're just one kind of NBFC. But generally NBFCs, and for the same reason, more or less.
So just to summarize, the first twin balance sheet was public sector banks lending to infrastructure companies.
Infrastructure meaning roads, bridges.
No, the companies like the companies that build the roads, the airports, the bridges, and so on, right?